Ready to dive deep into the world of stuttering? We've got a ton of research and expert opinions to unpack today. This is one of those speech disorders that's often misunderstood.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that stuttering often resolves itself. It's something like 80% of kids who stutter recover spontaneously, usually by the time they're 7.
80%. That's incredible. So, what's going on in the brain during that time? And for those who don't experience that kind of spontaneous recovery, can anything be done?
Well, research shows that in people who stutter, one side of the brain might be working overtime, while the other side is quieter, especially those areas responsible for speech.
Hmm.
But the good news is that the brain can be retrained. It's adaptable.
Like learning a new skill, like playing an instrument.
Exactly. Think about it like learning the piano. You're going to hit a lot of wrong notes when you first start, but with practice, your fingers learn to move more smoothly across the keys. Therapy for stuttering works in a similar way by helping to retrain those speech pathways.
So let's talk more about these therapies for stuttering. We've got fluency shaping and stuttering modification, two very different approaches. Can you explain the difference?
Sure, imagine you're trying to navigate a maze. Fluency shaping would be like creating a brand new, smoother path altogether, while stuttering modification is more about learning how to navigate the existing maze, but with more confidence, less struggle.
I like that analogy. But before we get too far into therapy, let's talk about some of the common misconceptions surrounding stuttering. I think we've all heard them. Things like nervousness, stress, or even that you can catch it from imitating someone who stutters. What's the truth about these?
Right, and none of those are true. One of the fascinating things is that stuttering is often heavily influenced by genetics, particularly if there's a family history of it. However, it's not the whole story. Think of it like this. Genetics might give you all the ingredients, but the environment and your experiences really determine the final product.
Okay, so you might be predisposed to stuttering, but environmental factors and experiences will determine how it manifests, if at all, that nature versus nurture concept.
Precisely.
We also can't ignore the social and emotional weight that often comes with stuttering. It's not something that people experience in isolation.
You're right. It can have a huge impact on every aspect of a person's life.
One of the sources we looked at, Scientific American, had a story about a person who avoided ordering certain foods at restaurants just to avoid stuttering.
It just highlights how even simple interactions can become a source of anxiety and cause people to avoid situations because of stuttering.
It makes you realize how important patience and understanding are, not just from loved ones, but from society as a whole.
I couldn't agree more. We've got to acknowledge those stereotypes we talked about earlier.
Mm.
The people who stutter are nervous or stressed or less intelligent. These kinds of assumptions are incredibly damaging.
And we can't forget about President Biden. He stutters, and he's certainly helped raise awareness, but his experience also shows us how much stigma still surrounds stuttering.
Definitely. And it's unfortunate that some people even use his stutter to make fun of him. It just shows how much work we still need to do.
It shows that we've got a long way to go when it comes to changing the perception of stuttering.
Absolutely. Having a stutter shouldn't prevent anyone from living their life to the fullest.
I totally agree. Now, this next one always gets me. Why do some people who stutter sing perfectly fine? It just seems counterintuitive.
It most likely comes down to how our brains process singing versus speaking. Think of it this way. When we sing, we're usually following a melody, a predetermined path. But speaking is more flexible, requiring a different type of processing from the brain. And this is often different in people who stutter.
So for some people, singing feels almost automatic because it uses different brain circuits than speaking.
It's fascinating, right? And it just goes to show how incredibly complex the human brain is. We're learning more every day, but there's still so much we don't know about how stuttering works in the brain.
It seems that the more we learn about stuttering, the more we realize just how unique each person's experience can be.
Yeah.
I feel like we've only scratched the surface, and I'm already looking at stuttering in a whole new light.
It really is. And, we were talking about unique experiences a minute ago. One of the articles mentioned how women who stutter are sometimes a minority within a minority.
That's true. Since stuttering is more prevalent in men, women who stutter may feel even more alone, like their experiences are not represented in research or support groups.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to create spaces where everyone feels welcome and heard. And while we're on that subject, stuttering is something that can affect anyone, anywhere, right? It's not limited to one specific part of the world.
Right, it's a global experience.
We found studies from all over: Denmark, Greece, Australia, even Japan.
It really highlights that stuttering is a universal human experience.
Right. And it impacts roughly the same percentage of people all over the world, right around 1%.
Which makes you wonder, are there cultural factors that come into play with how stuttering is seen or even experienced?
Oh, absolutely. Different cultures have different norms around speech and communication. Think about it. In some cultures, pausing or repeating can be seen as being thoughtful or showing respect.
That's so true. I've even found myself thinking someone was being extra thoughtful when their speech wasn't totally smooth.
Exactly. But then in other cultures, those same pauses might be seen as a sign of nervousness, maybe even a lack of intelligence. The way different cultures interpret these things can have a big impact on how people who stutter see themselves and their ability to communicate.
It's a good reminder that clear communication doesn't always mean perfectly fluent speech. We should all be aware of that.
Absolutely. And, this cultural lens also impacts how stuttering is treated too.
You mean like in terms of whether people seek therapy or even just get support from those around them?
Yeah, exactly. For example, in some cultures, getting professional help for stuttering is really common, but in others, it's not as common. It might even be discouraged.
So someone's background could influence how soon they get help, or even what kind of support feels right for them.
Exactly. Therapists and educators really need to be sensitive to those differences. A one-size-fits-all approach definitely won't work when it comes to something like this.
It's about meeting people where they are.
Right. And since we're talking about cultural differences, we've got to mention the impact of language itself.
Yeah. We touched on this a bit earlier with bilingualism. I'm curious, though, does the way a language is structured actually have any effect on how stuttering shows up?
Oh, it totally does. Different languages have different sounds and rhythms, grammatical structures. These can all have an impact on fluency. Some languages might be trickier than others, with certain sounds or syllable structures that anyone could find challenging, not just people who stutter.
I never even thought of it that way before. It's like some languages just seem to flow more easily than others, even for people who don't stutter.
Exactly. And this is something therapists need to keep in mind too. A therapist who understands those little quirks of a client's language can really tailor their approach to be more effective.
So it's really personalized then. It's not just about treating the stutter, but also understanding the individual and the language they use every day.
Right, exactly. And this goes back to what we were saying about the brain being amazingly adaptable. There's research that actually suggests that being bilingual might protect against stuttering to some degree.
Oh, wow. So speaking multiple languages might make someone less likely to stutter. How does that work?
Think of it this way. Juggling multiple languages is like a workout for your brain. It strengthens things like attention and working memory, those executive functions we hear so much about. And having these stronger cognitive abilities might help people who stutter have more control over their speech.
So it's like having a more solid foundation in the brain to support fluent speech then.
Exactly. Now, of course, it's not a guaranteed fix or anything, but it is pretty fascinating to see how the brain can adapt and even thrive when it's faced with these linguistic challenges.
It really does make you appreciate just how incredible the brain is, how adaptable it can be. And, while we're on the subject of embracing those differences, I think it's time we address the big elephant in the room, the social stigma that's still so often attached to stuttering.
Yeah, it's often the unspoken thing that weighs heavily on people who stutter.
It's like they're dealing with not just the challenges of stuttering itself, but also facing a world that often just doesn't understand and makes judgments based on misconceptions.
Exactly. It's on all of us as a society to do better, to change those outdated stereotypes and make the world more inclusive and accepting.
I completely agree. And a big part of that is representation, right?
Absolutely. Seeing people who stutter succeed, whether in the media, politics, or just in our everyday lives, can chip away at those harmful stereotypes and empower others to embrace their own voices.
It's about normalizing those differences, showing that stuttering doesn't have to hold anyone back from a full and meaningful life.
Precisely. And that normalization starts with understanding.
During this whole deep dive, one thing that struck me was how stuttering can sometimes lead to the development of some truly incredible strengths.
It's true. People who stutter often develop amazing resilience, empathy, and even creativity from their experiences.
It's like these challenges, even though they're hard, can build up this incredible inner strength.
Exactly. And that inner strength so often translates into this amazing ability to empathize with others.
They know what it means to feel different, to be misunderstood, and that allows them to connect with people in a way that many of us can't even imagine.
They've developed this, you could even say, superpower to see the world through a different lens, a more compassionate lens.
That's such a great way to put it, and it makes me think about how important it is for people who stutter to have those support networks, you know, places
Yeah.
where they can talk with others who really get what it's like. There are formal support groups, both online and in person, but sometimes it's that informal support that's even more important.
I agree. Having a support network makes such a huge difference when you're navigating those challenges and celebrating those triumphs, whether it's friends, family, or a therapist.
It's about having those safe spaces where you can be yourself, stutters and all.
Exactly. And luckily, those safe spaces aren't limited to the physical world anymore. Technology can be a double-edged sword, but it's opened up all these opportunities for connection and support.
Right. We talked about how the fast pace of the digital world can be tough for some people who stutter.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, technology has given us some incredible tools and resources.
Yeah, we've got apps to help reduce disfluencies, other devices for communication, and of course, online communities and forums where people can share their stories and support one another.
So, in a way, technology both presents challenges and empowers individuals to find their voice.
Exactly. It's all about finding ways to make technology work for everyone.
And speaking of how things are connected, I'm reminded of some of the research we looked at regarding the potential long-term health implications of stuttering.
You're talking about that possible connection between stuttering and neurodegenerative diseases, right?
Yeah.
That's a pretty new area of research, and I know it's sparked a lot of discussion.
Well, yeah, it's understandable that people would be worried, especially when you're talking about conditions like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So what does the research say about a connection?
It's crucial to remember that stuttering itself doesn't cause these diseases. But some researchers are looking at whether there could be shared risk factors or vulnerabilities.
Like underlying things in the body that might make someone more likely to have both stuttering and certain neurodegenerative conditions.
Exactly. One thing they're looking at is the role of oxidative stress. It's kind of like this. Our bodies are constantly battling these tiny things called free radicals, and sometimes this fight gets out of balance, leading to what's known as oxidative stress.
So it's like there are too many free radicals and the body can't keep up.
Exactly. And studies have shown that people who stutter might have higher levels of free radicals, which could mean that their bodies are working harder to fight them off.
Okay, that's oxidative stress. But how does that connect to neurodegenerative diseases?
Well, oxidative stress is believed to play a role in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, those types of conditions. It's like a domino effect. Those extra free radicals can harm brain cells over time, potentially contributing to problems with thinking and memory.
So the idea is that oxidative stress might be a common factor, a link between stuttering and some of these conditions.
That's one theory. But here's where it gets more complex. Inflammation also comes into the picture.
Inflammation, like when you twist your ankle and it gets all swollen.
Yep, exactly like that.
Hmm.
Inflammation is how the body heals itself, protects itself. But if inflammation is around for too long, it can actually backfire, especially when it comes to the brain.
Okay, so inflammation is involved, but how does that relate to both stuttering and neurodegenerative diseases?
Well, research suggests that folks who stutter might have higher levels of inflammatory stuff in their blood, hinting at the possibility of low-grade inflammation that doesn't go away.
And chronic inflammation in the brain isn't good, right?
Unfortunately, no, it's not. It can be like a slow-burning fire that damages brain cells over time, and that damage can play a part in how neurodegenerative diseases develop.
So it seems like oxidative stress and inflammation might be two important clues that connect stuttering to more serious issues down the line. But this research is still in its early stages, right?
Oh, for sure. We're just starting to understand these intricate connections. But it just goes to show how vital it is to think about stuttering holistically. It's not just about speech, but brain health and overall well-being as well.
It's about understanding how everything in the brain is connected and how those connections might affect a person's health throughout their life.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really crucial point we haven't gotten to yet: early intervention.
Oh, right. We've talked about therapy for adults who stutter, but what about children? Is there like a window of opportunity to work on stuttering when they're young?
Absolutely. The earlier you can intervene, the better. Remember how we were discussing that the brain is most adaptable during childhood?
Right, like that saying, neurons that fire together wire together.
Exactly. That idea applies to stuttering, too. When we address stuttering early on, we're making the most of that brain plasticity. It's much easier to reshape those speech pathways and develop good communication habits.
So it's like setting them up for a smoother experience down the line.
Exactly. And early intervention isn't only about speech therapy, it's about surrounding a child with a supportive environment where they feel comfortable communicating, whether their speech is perfectly fluent or not.
So it's a team effort then. Parents, educators, and therapists all working together to help a child thrive. What are some things parents should watch for? How do they know it's time to get professional help for a child who might be stuttering?
That's a great question. Every child develops at their own pace, but there are some red flags parents can watch out for.
Like what kinds of red flags?
Well, if a child's stuttering continues for months or seems to be getting worse instead of better, it's definitely a good idea to talk to a speech-language pathologist.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the physical parts of stuttering? Should parents be concerned if their child seems tense, blinking a lot, or avoiding eye contact when they stutter?
Those are definitely important things to notice. Remember, stuttering isn't always just about the sounds. It can involve physical tension, too, those little struggles a child might go through trying to speak.
So it's not just what we hear, but what we see, too.
Exactly. And if you see a lot of physical tension, it could mean the child's feeling frustrated or anxious about speaking.
Which is where early intervention can be so helpful, right? Helping kids learn healthy ways to cope and avoid those negative feelings around talking.
Exactly. And it's not only about helping them manage the stutter, but also encouraging a positive self-image and a love of communication. We want kids to feel good about expressing themselves, no matter how fluent their speech might be.
Because every voice deserves to be heard.
Right. Beautifully said. And sometimes finding your voice means finding others who have already found theirs.
You're talking about mentors and role models.
Exactly. Connecting with other people who stutter, especially adults who've faced the same challenges, can be incredibly powerful, especially for young people.
It's like having a guide, someone who's been there, done that, and can offer encouragement and support.
Exactly. It shows them that stuttering doesn't have to limit their dreams.
It's about shifting that inner dialogue from I stutter to I stutter and
And I am capable, I am resilient, I am worthy.
I love that. As we're talking about role models and how we see stuttering, I have to mention the media's role in all of this. Stuttering has been shown in such a stereotypical way for so long.
It's true. So often it's used for laughs or to make a character seem nervous or incompetent.
Right. And those portrayals, even if they're not meant to be hurtful, can really reinforce those negative stereotypes.
Totally. We need to see more authentic, nuanced representations of stuttering in movies, on TV, everywhere.
We need characters who stutter who are doctors, teachers, artists, anything you can imagine.
Yes. Characters who are complex and relatable, whose stutter is only one part of who they are.
Because when you see yourself reflected in the stories you're told, it can be so powerful.
Totally. It's about changing the story and showing that stuttering doesn't define a person.
It's about celebrating our differences and understanding that communication isn't one size fits all.
Perfectly said.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point to keep in mind as we head into the last part of our deep dive.
I agree. But before we get there, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. If we could completely change how society sees stuttering, what would that look like? What would that new story sound like?
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking question. It makes you think, what would that world look like if we could just reset everyone's assumptions about stuttering?
I imagine a world where it's not seen as something that needs to be fixed, where it's just another way of speaking, another part of human diversity.
Exactly. A world where communication is about connection and understanding, not just about how smoothly you can get the words out.
I love that. And it makes me think about how far we've come in understanding stuttering. We've learned so much about the brain, but there's always more to discover, right?
Absolutely. The brain is so complex,
Yeah.
and unraveling all of its secrets, well, it's a journey that never really ends.
Speaking of journeys, this deep dive has been quite a journey in itself. We've covered a lot of ground, from the science behind stuttering to how it impacts people's lives, the challenges, the successes. It's been pretty amazing.
It really has. And through all of it, what strikes me the most is just how incredibly resilient people are.
That's so true. We've seen how people who stutter don't just survive these challenges, they thrive. They defy expectations, break down barriers, and find their own unique voices in a world that doesn't always understand.
And they remind us all to be more understanding, more accepting, and to value our differences.
I couldn't agree more. As we wrap up our exploration of stuttering, I want to take a minute to think back on some of the key things we've learned. One of the biggest takeaways for me is that stuttering is a neurological condition. It's not a psychological issue.
Exactly. It's not about being nervous or anxious. It's about differences in how the brain is wired. Genetics often plays a big role, and understanding that is so important for changing how we talk about stuttering.
It's about replacing blame with understanding, judgment with acceptance.
Ex and that shift in perspective is what will create a world where people who stutter feel supported and included.
I couldn't agree more. And we also can't forget that the brain is amazingly adaptable, even as we get older. Therapy can have such a positive impact, helping people gain more control over their speech, manage their anxiety, and just communicate more effectively overall.
It's not just about changing how you speak, though, is it? It's about changing how you view yourself and your ability to share your thoughts and ideas.
It's about finding your voice, your confidence, and your own strengths.
Exactly. And part of that comes from connecting with people who get it. We talked about the importance of support networks, those places where people who stutter can come together, share what they're going through, give each other advice, and just realize, hey, I'm not alone in this.
Right, whether it's a support group, an online forum, or just having a few close friends or family who understand, that feeling of support makes such a difference.
It makes all the difference. And it's not just about finding support, it's about discovering your own inner strength.
Mm.
We talked about how stuttering can actually help people develop amazing qualities, things like resilience, empathy, creativity,
It's like those struggles, those moments when things are hard, they build up this incredible strength inside you.
and that ability to empathize, to connect with people on a deeper level. That's such a gift.
It really is. It's a gift to the person who stutters and everyone they interact with.
You said it.
And speaking of gifts, we have to acknowledge all the researchers, speech therapists, educators, and advocates out there who are working so hard to improve the lives of people who stutter. They're making a real difference.
They really are the unsung heroes in all of this. They're creating a better future for everyone.
They really are. And as we look to the future, I'm really hopeful. We're in a time of amazing discoveries, increased awareness, and a growing movement towards inclusivity.
It feels like a time when differences are celebrated, not shunned, and when everyone has the potential to make a difference.
That's beautifully said. So, as we close out our deep dive into the world of stuttering, I want to leave you with one final thought. Let's move beyond awareness and take action. Let's be allies and advocates for people who stutter. Let's build a world where every voice is heard, every story is valued, and every single person feels empowered to communicate authentically and confidently.
Because communication is a right, not a privilege. It's time we started acting like it.